welcome to Fireside Fairy Tales. My name is Rory, and I'm going to read you old Norwegian fairy tale tonight, just the one. It is on the longer side, but I still think this will come up a shorter episode. If you've never seen this show before, a couple of things off the top. We do this every Tuesday night, 6:30 Pacific, live, and if you are watching me live, you can join me in the chat. But if you're not watching me live, down in the description below, there'll be little timestamps where you can jump ahead to whatever part most interests you, like the start of the story. And you'll probably also notice that, unless I forget, we'll have some notes from the translator of the last two episodes after that story, if you're interested in those as well. So that would be notes on the Sleepy Hollow one, and I'm forgetting my own schedule. What else did I do? Oh, the Hug and Vardoga and Fia. Premonitions about death, basically. There is some notes there as well. But we're going to do that after, because there is a decent amount of them, and I kind of want to get to the story and make sure that we have enough time to get through the story in a comfortable way. I see that GS is in the chat. Hello, GS. I also know that I got a lot of new subscribers, so if you are a new subscriber, I welcome you. I see that I'm pushing dangerously close to 100 subscribers, and I feel like I should do something with that, but I have literally no ideas. So if you can think of something you would like to see happen at 100 subscribers, let me know, and I will run it against my own sense of self-decency, and then decide if it's an advice I will take. Anyhow, I don't think there's really anything else I need to say. If you want, by the way, if you want more stuff like this, there's a whole playlist called Fireside Fairy Tales on this channel that has like over 100 videos or something in it, which is nuts. It's crazy I've read that much stuff. It's amazing how much it accumulates. Okay, so we're going to read a story tonight that was recommended to us by its translator, who is down in the description below, of course, and will be once it is done, of course, because it doesn't let you comment ahead of time. It will be in a pinned comment. But the translator is Simon Roy Hughes, and Simon Roy Hughes, we've read works from him for the last 2 months or so, because basically, if I can find a translator, a living translator who is willing to let me read their stories, I'm delighted to do it, because it means that a lot of these stories have not been in English very long, if not this being the first time. I don't know if that's the case for the companion, as it is an Asbjørnsen and Moe translation, which are translators from the 19th century. We've read a bunch of stuff from them before. They have been translated by others, but of course Simon Roy Hughes has taken it on to translate their works. I can't verify this, but I have no reason to doubt it. Simon Roy Hughes says that a lot of the translations that were done of Asbjørnsen and Moe are not as good as they could be. And for that reason, he is running a Patreon, which will be in the pinned comment below as well, where he is trying to translate their works and put them into a publishable book, with a lot of good footnotes that give good context and a lot of careful translation. I myself am not a translator, so I am not in a position to do that, to assess anyone's translations. What I am is a storyteller and a writer in my own way. And that's what I'm going to do tonight, is I'm going to tell you the stories the best I can. Okay. So with that in mind, I came here for stories. Let's make stories happen. The story we're reading tonight is called The Companion. The Companion is a Norwegian, I'm calling fairy tale. It is more fairy tale than folk tale. We've been reading a lot of folk tales recently, and I've really enjoyed that. Think about folk tales, a lot more grounded, a lot more my neighbor did this kind of stuff, and a lot shorter. Because they tend to be almost anecdotes, really. In this case, we're going to sort of some classic Fireside Fairy Tale structures where it is a longer, kind of rules of three fairy tale style story, but it's also bonkers, which I love. I love that aspect about this. The lack of pretension and just sort of the indulgence into whatever weird thought the author might have had or people enjoyed in the tavern when it was told. I promise you at no point in this story will you really know what's going to come next, because it takes sharp lefts all over the place, and it is phenomenally brutal. I don't mean gory, and I don't even really mean that violent. It has just a kind of brutalist ethic. It's you'll see what I mean. That said, I should say these are not necessarily intended for kids. I wouldn't say there's anything too shocking in this, but be aware. You know, it's sort of young adult at youngest kind of stuff. So let's get our sound a little organized. And let's start. Just a little ambiance. And as always, let me know if the sound is intruding on anything, and I can adjust it. So our story tonight is called The Companion. It is a work collected by Asbjornsen and Moe in 19th century Norwegian folklorists. And the translation we're going to read comes from Simon Roy Hughes, whose blog, where I got this from, and whose Patreon are linked down below. And you should support it so we can get more excellent works like this in English. There was once upon a time a peasant boy who dreamed he would have a king's daughter from far beyond the countries, and she was as red and as white as milk and blood, and so rich that there never was an end to her riches. But when he woke up, it was as if she was alive before him, and he considered her so fine and beautiful that he could not live if he did not have her. So he sold what little he owned and went out into the world to search for her. He walked far, and farther than far, and during the winter he came into a country where all the highways lay straight and did not turn. We call that Saskatchewan in Canada. That's not where it is. I'm joking. When he had walked straight ahead for a quarter of a year he walked straight, he came to a town. And outside the church door there was a large block of ice, within which there was a corpse. And the whole church congregation, people of God, spat upon it as they passed by. The boy wondered about this, and when the parson came out of the church, he asked him what it was all about. "This is a foul criminal," said the parson. "He was executed for all his godlessness, and set up here for mockery and derision." "What has he done, then?" asked the boy. "Here in life he was a wine fraud," said the parson. "He mixed wine with water." The boy thought that this was not so bad a misdeed, and since he'd paid for it with his life, they might at least let him down into Christian soil and have some peace after his death. "No," the priest said, "that could by no means happen, for folk would be needed to break him out of the ice. It would take money to buy Christian soil from the church, which, by the way to give away the scam, the grave digger would want paying for the grave, and the church owner would have for the bells, the sexton the song, and the parson for the burial. Do you think anyone is going to pay all that for an executed sinner? He asked. Well, yes, said the boy. If only he were put into the ground, then he would pay for the wake, from what little the boy had. So, they broke the wine fraud out of that block of ice, laid him in Christian soil. They rang and sang over him, and the person scattered the soil, and they drank his wake, so they both cried and laughed together. What were they crying about if they were spitting on this man? That is the thing I really got stuck on. But when the boy had paid for the burial, he didn't have so many shillings left in his pockets. He began on the road again, but he hadn't gone far before a man came after him, asking him if he didn't think it was lonely to go alone. No, the boy didn't think so, because he always had something to think about, he said. But he might need a servant anyway, the man asked. No, said the boy. I am used to being my own servant, and even if I wanted to, I couldn't afford to have anyone, for I have no money for food and wages. You need a servant. I know better than you do, said the man. And you need a servant that you can rely on in life and death. If you don't want me to serve, you can take me as your companion. You will benefit from me, and it shall not cost you a shilling. I will carry myself, and there is no want of food or clothing. Yes, in such a manner, the boy would like to have this stranger as his companion on the road. So they traveled together, and the man mostly walked before him and showed him the way. When they had traveled far enough through the countries, over hills and heaths, they came to a mountain that blocked their path, and there his companion knocked and asked them to open up. And, indeed, it opened up. And as they came far into the mountain, a troll hag came out with a chair and bade them, "Be so good as to sit down. They may be tired," she said. But the companion cut her right off. He did. And he said, "Sit down yourself." Well, she had to sit down for reasons unspecified. And when she had sat down, she stayed sitting there because the chair was such that it did not let go of whatever came near it. Meanwhile, the companion and the boy went around inside the mountain, and the companion looked around until he saw a sword hanging above the door. He would certainly have that, and if he had it, he promised the troll hag that he would let her off the chair. I'm curious what chat thinks is going to happen next. I'm not going to wait. But I am curious. "No," she screamed. "Ask me for anything else. You can have anything else, but not that. That's my 3-sister sword." For there were 3 sisters who owned it together. "Well, you can sit there until the end of the world," said the companion. But when she heard this, she said he should have it, if only he would release her. So, the companion took the sword and left with it, and let her sit there anyway. What was the point of the deal then? Honestly, why did he even ask? There's your first puzzle for this story. And so we left. And when they had walked far across the naked mountains and broad heaths, they came to a mountain that stood in their path. Again. And there the companion knocked and bade them to open the door. Things went like last time. It opened up to them. And when they came far into the mountain, a troll hag came to them with a chair and again bade them to sit down. They might be tired, she said. Sit down yourself, said the companion, and then things went with her like they had with her sister. She dared nothing else. And when she sat in the chair, she could not come loose again. Meanwhile, the boy and his companion walked around in the mountain and opened all the cabinets and drawers until he found what he was looking for. It was a ball of golden yarn. He would certainly have that, and he promised the troll hag that if she would give it to him, then he would let her off the chair. She said he could have anything she owned, but she wouldn't lose that, because it was her three-sister ball of yarn. But when she heard that she would be sitting there until doomsday if he didn't have it, she said he could take it after all, if only he would loose her. Well, the companion took it, he did, but he let her remain sitting where she sat. Then they walked again for many days, over moors and through forests, until again they came to a mountain that stood in their way. And things were just as they were, went just as well, rather, as on the other two occasions. The companion knocked. It opened. And inside the mountain, a troll hag came with a chair and bade them sit. But the companion said, "Sit down yourself." And so she sat there. They hadn't gone through many of the rooms before the companion saw an old hat hanging from a hook behind the door that the companion would have. But the hag didn't want to lose it, because it was her three-sister hat. And if she gave it away, then she would be unhappy. But when she heard that she would remain sitting there until the end of the world if he didn't get it, well, she said he could take it, if only she would be loosed. And when the companion had received the hat, the honorable fellow he was, he asked her to sit where she sat, just as her sisters. After a longer than long time, they came to a sound. There the companion took the golden ball of yarn and threw it so hard against the rock on the other side of the river that it bounced right back, returning to his hand. And then he thrown it a few times, and it became back and forth until it wove a bridge, which the companion and the boy walked over, across the sound as if upon the water. And when they had come to the other side, the companion bade the boy to wind up the golden yarn as quickly as he could. For if we do not wind it up quickly, then the three troll hags will come and tear us to pieces. Now I know what you're thinking. weren't they doomed to sit in that chair till the end of times? And for that, the story has no answer. So, welcome to Folktales. The boy wound it up as quickly as he could, and when no more than the last thread remained, the troll hags came hurrying. They rushed down to the water so that the fugue stood up before them, and they grabbed at the end, but they were not able to get it, and so they drowned in the sound. And there they are, drowning in the sound. 3 women who did nothing but invite someone into their house. I think if I was retelling the story, like, without trying to be true to the source, I think I would tell it that they still had the chairs attached to them. I think that would satisfy a problem and make a comic image. When they had walked a few more days, the companion said, "Now, we will soon come to the castle where she is." "The king's daughter, of whom you have dreamed. And when we get there, you will go in and tell the king what you have dreamed, and what it is you are traveling for." And so when they arrived, he did so, and he was well received. He was given a room for himself and one for his servant, in which they were supposed to remain. And when the time approached for them to have some food, he was bidden to the king's table for dinner. And when he saw the king's daughter, he recognized her at once. And it was her he had dreamed that he would have. Oh, so he told her his errand. And she replied that she liked him as well, but she would have him too. And she would have him too, she said. But first, the boy had to endure 3 trials. When they had eaten, she gave him a pair of golden scissors. And then she said, "The first trial is that you should hide these scissors and return them to me tomorrow at dinner. It's not a difficult trial, I don't believe," she said, with a grimace. "But if you cannot, then you shall lose your life. That's the law. And then you shall be executed and wheeled, and your head put on a stake like the suitors whose skulls you see through the windows." And there were men's heads hanging around the king's farm, the way crows sit on the sheaves in autumn. It's a very specific law. You propose to my daughter, lose those golden scissors. Well, there was some trick here, thought the boy, but the king's daughter was so lusty and wild. And flapped around him so that he forgot both the scissors and himself. And as they were careening and carrying on, she stole the scissors from him, and he didn't notice. Guess he's going to be ahead on a pike. So when he came up to his chamber in the evening and told how things had gone, what she had said about the scissors that she had given him to hide, his companion said, "I suppose you have the scissors she gave you?" Well, of course he felt in his pockets, but there were no scissors. The boy grew more than sorrowful when he realized they were gone. Yes, well, be patient. I shall try you to get them back. Again, said his companion, and he went down into the stable, and there stood, and again, I want to know, anyone in chat can guess what the next scene was going to be. There stood a great big stable buck that belonged to the king's daughter, and it was such that it could fly many times faster through the air than it ran upon the ground. And he took the three sisters' sword and struck it between its horns, saying, "When does the king's daughter ride to her sweetheart tonight?" Now I know what you're thinking as a reader of this story. What's he talking about? What sweetheart? Why did he know to talk to a horse? And the answer to that is, who cares? Well, the goat bleated and said he dared not tell, but when he was struck once more, he said that the king's daughter should come at 11 o'clock. The companion put the three-sister hat, and then he was invisible, of course, and waited for her to come. Well, she took and smeared the buck with an ointment, which she had in a horn. Then she said, in the air, over roof and spire, over land, over water, over mountain, over valley, to my sweetheart, who waits for me in the mountain tonight." And as the goat set off, the companion flung himself up behind, and they went like the wind through the air. They were not long on the way when suddenly they came to a mountain again in their way. There she knocked. And went in through the mountain to a troll who was her sweetheart. Now, "A new suitor who wants me has come, my dear," said the king's daughter. "He is young and handsome, but I don't want anyone else but you," she said, making herself so attractive to the mountain troll. "So I put him to test, and there are the scissors he should hide and look after. Take care of them now," she said, giving them over to the troll in the mountain. Then they both laughed so heartily, as if they had already got the boy on the spokes in the wheel. I'm assuming everybody knows what the wheel is, but if you don't, it's a rather terrible form of execution where you are just destroyed over the tread side of a wheel. I won't go in more detail than that, but it's a horrible way to die. And there they are laughing. "Yes, I'll hide them, I'll look after them, and I shall sleep in my bride's arms when the raven pecks at the boy's bowels," said the troll, and he put the scissors in an iron box with 3 locks. But as soon as he let go of the scissors in the box, the companion in the three sisters' hat that made him invisible grabbed them. Now, neither of them could see him do this because of the hat. And so the troll locked the box, but there was nothing within it, and hid the keys in a hole in a molar where he had a toothache. He needs a dentist if he can fit a whole key in his tooth, where the boy would have difficulty finding it, as he thought. Wow. It was past midnight when she traveled home again, and the companion sat behind her on the buck. And it did not take them long on On the way home, at dinner, the boy was bidden down to the king's table, but the king's daughter had such bad manners. She was so haughty and uncomfortable that she nearly wouldn't look to the side where the boy sat. When they had eaten, she assumed a solemn holiday expression and made herself as happy as she could and said, "I suppose you have the scissors I asked you to hide yesterday?" "Why, yes," said the boy. "I have them here." Picking them up and stabbing them in the table so that it bucked, and the king's daughter could not have fallen iller if he had driven the scissors into her eyes. But she made herself attractive and gentle yet, and said, "Since you have looked after the scissors so well, it may not be difficult for you to hide my golden ball of yarn." Not the one, as far as I know, that he picked up and made the bridge out of, by the way. That never comes up again. This seems to be a different one. "And take care of it, so you may give it back to me tomorrow at dinner. But if you do not have it, then you shall lose your life and be executed. Such is the law," she said. "Well, this was no difficult matter," said the boy, taking and putting the golden ball of yarn into his pocket. But she began to joke and flap about him. And again, so that he forgot both himself and that silly little golden ball of yarn. And as they were careening and carrying on, she stole it from him and let him go. When he came up to the chamber and told what they had said and done, his companion said, "I suppose you do have the golden ball of yarn Rushy gave you?" "Yes, I have it," said the boy, putting his hand into his pocket where he put it. But no, he didn't have the golden ball of yarn. And now he fell so ill that he didn't know what to do. "Yes, well, be patient," said his companion. "I shall try to get a hold of it," he said, taking the sword and the three-sister hat. He swept off to a blacksmith and had 12 stone of iron laid into the sword. And then he came into the stable and he gave the goat a blow between the horns with it so that it tumbled. And then he asked, "What does the king's daughter ride to her sweetheart tonight?" 12 o'clock, the goat bleated. So the companion put on the three-sister hat again and waited till she came fumbling in with the grease horn and smeared the goat. Then she said, as the first time, in the air, over roof and spire, over land, over water, over mountain, over valley, to my sweetheart, who waits for me in the mountain tonight." And as soon as they set off, the companion threw himself onto the back of the goat, and they went like a wind passes through the weather. And suddenly they came to the Troll's Mountain. And when she had struck 3 strokes, they went in to the troll, who was her sweetheart. "How did you hide the golden scissors I gave you yesterday, my dear?" said the king's daughter. "The suitor had them and gave them back to me," she said. That was impossible, said the troll, for he had locked them in a box with 3 locks and tucked the key in the hole of his molar. But when they unlocked it and looked, the troll did not have the scissors in his box. Then the king's daughter told him that she had given the suitor her golden ball of yarn. "Here it is," she said, "for I took it from him again so that he did not notice. But what shall we do now, since that he knows such arts?" Well, the troll did not rightly know, but when they had thought a little about it, they decided that they would make up a big fire. And burn the golden ball of yarn. So they were sure he wouldn't be able to get it. As soon as she threw the ball of yarn onto the fire, the companion stood ready in his 3-person hat and grabbed it, as if they had pitched it to him. But of course none of them saw him, for, again, he was wearing the hat that made him invisible. After the king's daughter had been with the troll for a while, and it drew on towards morning, she returned home. The companion sat behind on the buck with her, and they went fast and well. Well, when the boy was bidden for dinner, his companion gave him the ball of yarn. The king's daughter was even haughtier and more badly behaved than last time, and when they had eaten, she pursed her mouth and said, "Well, if only it were so well that I might have my golden ball of yarn back, which I gave you to hide yesterday." "Well," said the boy, "you shall have it. Here it is," he said, and banged it on the table so that the table bucked, and the king jumped high into the air. The king's daughter didn't expect that. She grew as pale as a corpse. They had burned that. But she soon made herself happy again, papering over that, of course, shock, and said it was well done. And now she had only one small, itty-bitty, tiny-weeny trial left. "If you are so clever that you can give me what I am thinking of tomorrow at dinner, then you shall both take me and have me," she said. The boy was as if he'd been sentenced to his life, for he thought it was not possible to know what she was thinking of, and even more difficult to find it. And when she came up to his chamber, it was almost impossible to console him too. His companion just said that he should stay calm. He would certainly get to know the matter. And as he had done on both the other 2 occasions, the boy finally settled down and lay himself down to sleep, because the hero of this story does nothing. Which is a delightful thing about this story. I'm sure you've put that together by now. Meanwhile, the companion went to the blacksmith and had 24 stone of iron laid into his sword. That is a heavy sword. And when this was done, he went to the stable, drew up his massive buster sword, and struck the goat between its horns so that it tumbled from wall to wall. "When does the king's daughter go to her sweetheart tonight?" he said. 1 o'clock, bleated the goat. So when the time drew near, the companion was in the stable with the 3-sister hat on. And when she had smeared the goat and said what she had to say, that they should go into the air to her sweetheart who waited for her in the mountain, they rushed off through the weather and wind again, and the companion sat behind. But she was not light-handed this time, For just like that, he struck the king's daughter here and then there, so that he nearly struck her health from her. I know this is some old English, but to be clear, he is punching the hell out of her while she's on a flying goat and he's sitting behind her invisible. What do you think her reaction is to that? It's not what you think. When they came to the mountain wall, she knocked at the gate so that it opened, and they went through. Whoop. Sorry, I clicked the wrong button. Back up. The mountain to her sweetheart. And when she arrived, she moaned and complained and said she did not know that the weather could be so hard. But she thought there was someone with them, so at least she got that far, who struck both her and the goat. Why was he hitting the goat? And she was certainly both yellow and blue over her whole body, so badly she had suffered on the road. And then she told how the suitor had a golden ball of yarn too, and how that could be neither she nor the troll could understand. But do you know what I've done now? She said. No. How could the troll know that? Well, she replied, I have said that he must give me what I am thinking of tomorrow, and that was your head. Do you think he can get it, my dear? Said the king's daughter, caressing the troll. I don't think so, said the troll, and he swore upon it. And then he laughed and guffawed worse than aghast, and both the troll and the king's daughter said that the boy would suit the spokes and the wheels, and that the ravens would hack out his eyes before he could get the head of the troll. Children's fairy tale, by the way. When morning drew near, she should return home, but she was now afraid, she said, for she thought there was someone after her, and she dared not go home alone. The troll had to go with her on her way home, and yes, he would go with her. And he got out his goat, for he had the like of the king's daughter, one of the like of the king's daughters, and smeared it well between the horns. And when the troll had mounted it, the companion hung behind him. And when they set off away through the air to the king's farm, but on the way, the companion struck the troll and the goat and gave them strike upon strike and stroke upon stroke of his sword, and so they sank more and more, and eventually they were almost on their way to sinking into the sea as they crossed. When the troll realized he was in such trouble, he followed the king's daughter all the way home to the king's farm. But he remained outside to make sure she came home safely. But as soon as she closed the door, the companion chopped the troll's head off, and hurried up to the boy's chamber. Here is what the king's daughter was thinking about. Yes, this was both well and good, you can understand, and when the boy was bidden to the table and they had eaten, the king's daughter was as happy as a lark. Perhaps you have what I was thinking about, she said. Indeed I do, said the boy, and he snatched it out from beneath the flap of his tunic and banged it down on the table so hard that the whole thing overturned. Now the king's daughter was as if she had been lying in the ground. She could not deny that this was what she had been thinking of. Why couldn't she deny it? And now he had to have her, as she had promised. And then they drank to their wedding, and there was joy throughout the kingdom. This is not the end of the story, believe it or not. But joy throughout the kingdom. But the companion took the boy aside and told him he ought to close his eyes and pretend he was sleeping on his wedding night. If he held his life dear and would heed him, he would not allow himself a wink of sleep before he had separated the girl from the troll form she had on her. And to do so, he should whip her with a switch of 9 new birch besoms and scrub her in 3 vessels of milk. The first he should scrub her in a vessel of year-old whey. Year-old whey. In case you missed that. Then he should rub her in sour milk. Then he should rinse her off in a tub of sweet milk. The switches lay beneath the bed, and he'd put the tubs in the corner. It was all ready. Yes, the boy promised he would obey him and do as he said. When they were in the bridal bed that night, the boy pretended to be asleep. The king's daughter raised herself up on her elbow and looked at him to see if he slept. She tickled him under the nose, and the boy slept just as well. Then she pulled the hair of his beard. But he slept like a log, she thought. So she pulled out a big butcher's knife from beneath her pillow to cut his head off. But the boy shot up, struck the knife from her hand, grabbed her by her hair, then he whipped her with the switch, wore it out on her until there was not a twig left, and when this was done, he threw her in the tub of year-old whey, and then he saw what manner of animal she was. She was black as a raven all over her body, and when he'd scrubbed her in the whey and scoured her with the soured milk and rinsed her off in the sweet milk, the troll form came off her, and she was so happy and as beautiful as she had never been so beautiful before. Still not done, by the way. The next day, the companions said they had to leave. Well, the boy was ready to leave, and the king's daughter too, because her dowry had long been settled. How was it settled? By a poor little boy? No, by the random companion. At night, the companion had brought all the gold and silver and all the precious things left behind after the troll in the mountain to the king's farm, and when they left in the morning, it was more valuable than the king's country and kingdom. And they did not know how to carry it with them. But the companion knew how to right this wrong. The troll had left 6 bucks that could fly in the air, and they loaded these with so much gold and silver they had to walk on the ground, and they were not able to lift off and fly with it. And that which the bucks were not good for carrying had to stay at the king's farm. Then they traveled far and farther than far, but at last the bucks grew so tired and so exhausted that they could not go any farther. The boy and the king's daughter did not know what to do, but when the companion saw that they could not come any farther, he lifted the whole dowry onto his neck, laid the bucks on top, and carried it all so far there was no more than a good half-league before the boy reached his home. Then the companion said, "Now, I must be separated from you, but I can't stay with you any more." But the boy would not be separated from him. He would not lose him, neither for too little nor too much. Well, then he would go a half-league more, but then he wouldn't go with him any longer. And when the boy begged and urged him to come home and stay with him, or at least celebrate his homecoming beer with his father, the companion refused. He could not. Then the boy asked what he would have for all he had done and helped him with. If it should be anything, then it would have to be half of what he produced in 5 years, said the companion. Yes, that he would have. And when he was gone, the companion, the boy left all his wealth and went empty-handed home. Then they celebrated his homecoming so that it sounded, and was asked about across 7 kingdoms. And when they had finished, they farmed throughout the winter, both with the bucks and the 12 horses that his father had, before they brought home all the gold and silver. After 5 years, the companion returned, and was to have his share, and the man had divided everything into 2 equal parts. But there is One thing you haven't divided, said the companion. What is that? Said the man. I thought I'd divided everything. You have produced a child, said the companion. You must also divide that into 2 parts. Well, he promised, so yes, he had to. And he took his sword, and as soon as he lifted it to split the child in 2, the companion grabbed the tip of his sword, so he could not hew. Are you not happy now that you aren't allowed to hew? He said. Yes, as happy as I've ever been, said the man. Yes, so glad was I when you released me from the ice block, he said. Keep everything you have, I don't need anything, because I am a floating spirit. He was indeed the wine fraud who'd been in the block of ice outside the church door, upon which everyone spat, and he had been his companion and helped him as a thanks for giving everything he had to bring him peace and get him into Christian soil. And he'd been allowed to follow him for a year, but the time approached when they should be separated for the last time. Then he'd been allowed to see him again, but now they had to be separated forever, for now they rang for him the bells of heaven. I don't know. Don't ask. There are parts of the story that I am delighted by. But there are parts of the story that, because it's such a long and strange story, that it takes so many weird turns, I think it's easy to forget. The distinctly non-Christian things that were done to get to this end state. Obviously, if there is a moral, it's bury people in their Christian soil. Don't leave them in ice blocks and spit on them. Let me stop our sound effects then. Get some music back in and a little bit of fireplace. As you can see, that took basically the entire session, so that's the only story we're doing tonight. However, not quite done yet. I am going to read for you a bit of Translator's notes, and let me just pull that up. Okay, so this section of the show is called Translator's Notes, and it's where, any translator who I've read puts comments in the video about, like, things I might have missed or misunderstood or whatever else. But for our purposes, both these comments come from Jürgen Hubert, who is a translator of German folktales, and we've read a bunch of. Now, the first set of notes is from our Sleepy Hollow video, which we did 2 weeks ago, and was a reading of a various Headless Horseman myths, and, you know, their obvious connection to the Sleepy Hollow story by Washington Irving. So, just a couple of things from Jürgen here. I'm just going to read them. They're not my thoughts or comments. Jürgen's personal stance is that if the Brothers Grimm were willing to change the tales to make them fit for different audiences, then he can hardly blame Disney for doing the same. I do agree with Jürgen on this. Consider the story of Rapunzel. In the first edition, she gets kicked out of the tower after getting impregnated by the prince. For completeness' sake, Jürgen would like to mention that all the tales used in the Sleepy Hollow episode are also found in his latest book, called Lurkers at the Threshold, 100 Ghost Stories, I believe. Note there is a H.P. Lovecraft book of a similar title. It's not that. Continuing with Jürgen's notes, beheadings were the most common form of execution in pre-modern times, which was a question we had in chat, and were considered most merciful, since it was far preferable when, say, compared to being burnt at the stake, or Shudder being broken on the wheel, which we heard about today. Because the man in the story freely confessed to his crimes and turned himself to the authorities, it probably means he deserved the quick, clean death of beheading. There's a quote here. Maybe it was something I said, maybe it was something chat said, I don't remember, but I do remember us talking about stones. No stones have ominous histories, in quotes. Jürgen adds, Germany is full of old stones like boundary markers, stone crosses, and similar markers that were erected after some usually long-forgotten incident. And as usual, when people don't remember the facts, they come up with their own explanations. So there's a rich body of folklore revolving around stones in Germany. Crossroads are also popular non-crossable boundaries for spirits, was mentioned by Jürgen, which is something we explored last month as well. Also, you can see that in the Frau Gauden stories from the beginning of December. One massive difference between Germany and North America is the residential areas. One massive difference between German and North American residential areas is that the yard and of almost every house in Germany is surrounded by a fence, a hedge, or another careful boundary marker separating what belongs to different people, and lawsuits regarding which lands belong to whom are extremely common. I don't know how common that is here. I mean, there's a lot of land in Canada. Like, that's... We're enormous. I don't know if anybody really appreciates how much land there is here. Continuing with Jürgen's notes. My personal suspicion is that the knight and the nun, this was the last story we read in that video, were well acquainted before the abduction, but that the nun was dumped into the monastery by her family, possibly to avoid a scandal. However, once she had spoken her vows as a nun, even under duress, they were considered to be absolutely binding, considering how, in many old stories, the villain abducts the maiden and tries to force her to marry him. If she speaks the marriage vows, they are considered binding as well, no matter what pressures were applied to make her to do this, because oaths were sacred and oath breakers were condemned. And I think that's addressing the fact that I was like, I don't think they did anything all that bad. Okay, and then the next set of notes come from the video that was really quite popular last week called Folk Tales Where People Drop Dead or something to that effect. And this comments again come from Jürgen. We largely, I will say before I get to Jürgen's notes, if you didn't watch that video, you definitely should. The intro of that involves a blog post from Simon Roy Hughes, who also translated the story today, who talked about the Hugh, the Vardoga, and the Fia, which are these, again, premonitory sort of spirits that foretell your death. And Jürgen tells me something here that I did not know, that I kind of wish I did before, but that's why these notes exist. Germany has similar kind of death premonitions as well. The most common name is Vorspuck. I suppose the point is to bring your affairs in order, submit to the last rites, and make peace with yourself, which is a good point about the last rites, because I'm not Catholic, and so I forget that that's a very important thing. Because we were discussing why would a spirit come and tell you you're going to die in a few hours. Well, how is that helpful? Continuing with Jürgen's notes, it's a very common theme in German folklore that contact with the dead is dangerous to your health. People just waste away and die. Think of encounters with the ring wraiths in The Lord of the Rings, which is a connection I love. Because that's not an accidental connection. I should add that, Tolkien knows the stories we're reading. He was a linguist and with an interest in folklore. And from a narrative perspective, having the eyewitness linger on for just long enough so that they can tell the stories to others is rather convenient. This is, again, addressing things in that video. Continuing on with Jürgen's notes, fiery men, like the one in the Alpine hut, are very common in German language folklore. They are frequently interpreted as souls in purgatory, but they also function as nameless horrors as well. Now, this was one that we had a whole discussion on, so I'm happy to get an answer here. Milk soup, which was something made in the story, and I was asked about it, and I didn't have a good answer, is basically taking chunks of old bread, real bread, not whatever people in the former British Empire eat. That's Jürgen's comment, not mine. Sprinkling either salt or sugar over it, then pouring hot milk over it all. It's a very simple dish, but it can be made quickly and may be enough if all you want is to heat up after having been in the cold, which definitely would have been her goal. And then the last comment concerns Clinus Clostal, which in the video, I did pin a comment about this, but I want to add the clarification here. In that original video, I said Clinus Clostal is the name of a man, and then carried on. And what I meant to say is the name of a valley. This is one of those sort of habits things. Wasn't thinking about my words. I heard it later when I was looking at the video. So Clinus Clostal is a valley that we read a story about. And Jurgen says, I visited Clinus Clostal Valley last August and took pictures of the lake where that church must have manifested. Like all lakes in the Upper Harz region, it is an artificial lake that was originally constructed to provide a water supply for the local mines. GS says, these comments are extremely helpful. I like them. I mean, I like folklore, if you didn't notice. So getting insights on this stuff is very helpful to me. I see GS says they ran with the chair stuck to their bums. So obviously GS had the same thought I had. I'm looking back through comments during the story. Always so dangerous to woo princesses. I guess if you didn't make some kind of... Like, obviously the main reason you date or would get a princess is you were royalty. But if you're trying to tell a story of a commoner getting it, you need some reason why every commoner couldn't get it. A troll was her sweetheart. Was a surprise to GS. This companion is a handy guy. GS says, yeah, I did know this actually. That last amount of iron on the sword was 4 and 20 stones, which is 336 pounds for the Americans. And what is that in kilograms? I think it's like 200 kilograms or something. It's a little in that neighborhood. GS says, did people ride goats? They're so round. I guess so. I don't know why she has to smear it with ointment. I don't know. The story is not interested in explaining itself. Otherwise, found the story very touching. I found it entertaining because it was super strange. And I like that aspect of folktales and folklores. I think, just as a closing thought on this, I was sent by Spencer, who's been on the channel before, a writer friend of mine, a little article about this. The idea that what you can learn about modern storytelling, because I am a writer first and foremost, that's the main thing I'm trying to accomplish in my life. These are hobbies that are contingent or not contingent, related to it, but it was a sort of a thing about how reading folktales kind of reveals that some of the most classic wisdom about modern writing and storytelling is not as nearly as established as it likes to think it is. And one of the things it does really well is it calls attention to its own artifice by, with the structural repeating three beats of 3 and all of that. But it makes a case. I'm not going to remake it here because it'd take me like 40 minutes and we're already kind of going long. But it makes the case that, like, maybe your goal in telling a story isn't always to completely hide that it's a story. And that's something that, like, folklore and fairy tales don't try to do. They try to instead acknowledge the fact that this isn't real in the sense that you would want to, and don't try to tell it so completely that you would believe it's another world without engaging your own imagination to fill some gaps. And all those kinds of weird aspects came out in this story, The Companion, and as much as I've sort of made light of aspects of it to try and, add entertainment value for the audience, I personally really enjoyed the story for those reasons. I like the fact that I am left to figure out why you had to grease up a goat to fly it. So, everybody who's lurked or watched or come by or whatever else, thank you so much for coming by. I always enjoy this. If you haven't already, you can show me that you like the video by giving it a like. Lets me know what I should be doing in the future to entertain the audience I do have, small as you may be. If you haven't subscribed, consider it. We do a variety of things. Some are just about writing and a little more modern and silly, but at least every Tuesday we do folklore. And you take care of your 336-pound Buster Sword that you're going to hit goats with, and I'll keep the fire warm. Thank you so much for coming by. I'll see you later. Have a good sleep.